Scientist G, DMRL. He is the group head of Titanium Alloy Group, DMRL, Hyderabad. He has a total of 32 years of experience in teaching and research and development. He has about 70 publications and reports in national and international journals and 2 IIM book chapters on aeronautical materials. He also served as a postdoctoral fellow at Ohio State University, Columbus, USA, where he worked on the Federal Aviation Administration FAA funded project. He received Agni Award in 2007, 2 Best Presentation Awards in ATM IIM Engineer of the Year Award by Institute of Engineers and DRDO Laboratory Award Scientist of the Year 2015.
Amit sir, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. You are able to hear me, right?
Yeah, it's a crystal clear, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
You can share a screen, sir.
I'll just.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Yeah. I can start, or should I
Yes,
wait
sir.
for? Should I start? Yeah.
Let's start, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon to you all. I am Amit Bhattacharjee, and thank you, Tanya, for the kind introduction. I will talk about titanium alloys, its characterization and processing, as well as I will try and correlate the properties and the usages so that you can get a flavor of it. I will not go too much into metallurgy, although some amount of microstructures and all have to be shown because it correlates with the properties. So I will try and keep metallurgy to bare minimum as possible. So firstly, I need to acknowledge my guides, Dr. Samir Kamath, Dr. Gogia, and Professor Bhargav, who is no more, and Professor Banerjee, who introduced me to titanium alloys when I joined DMRL. Then Dr. Nandi, who was the earlier group head of titanium alloy group, and the professors at Ohio State University, whom I worked with for the FAA-funded project, that is Professor Williams, Professor Mills, Professor Ghosh, Professor Rocklin, and also the members of the titanium alloy group. This is how I will go about my talk. First, a little bit of introduction, which will involve classification of titanium alloys and basics, the general heat treatment of titanium alloys, the terms and microstructures, the melting of, briefly the melting of titanium alloys, and brief about corrosion aspects of titanium. Then I'll go on to different alloy systems, its processing and characterization. And this is how it will go. First, I'll talk about alpha alloys, then alpha plus beta alloys, then beta alloys, then some few biomedical applications, and then finish off with gamma aluminides, which are being used nowadays. Titanium, as you all know, has got two principal virtues. It has got high strength to weight ratio. That is why it is used in aerospace applications, airframes, engine components, and it has also got very good corrosion resistance. So it is used in chemical as well as biomedical industries. Although biomedical in India is just taking off, but it is still there. It's a very important field nowadays, and a lot of developments are taking place in India. Then there are other niche applications like shape memory alloys, which are used in biomedical as well as the other applications, hydrogen storage. And because of all these properties, it is, as you can see, used in various kinds of industries. Aerospace, we talked about all kinds of aerospace, be it military, be it civil, be it space. Then, as I told you, medical applications, petrochemical, metal finishing, pulp and paper, and general engineering. And also there are certain specialist applications which are there, but not the main part, but still it is there. Now coming to titanium, its melting point is around roughly 1663 degrees centigrade, and its problem is the oxide is very stable, and that is the reason it took many years to extract it for use as engineering metal and alloy. And then it has also got high chemical reactivity. That is why it has to be melted in vacuum, and I mean, care has to be taken while processing it. Now, as far as alloying elements are concerned, as you all know, titanium exists in two crystal structures. First is alpha, which is a hexagonal closed pack structure, and the beta, which is a BCC structure. And the alloys that stabilize either of these phases are known as either alpha stabilizers or beta stabilizers. Now, if you look at alpha stabilizers, nitrogen, oxygen, aluminium are the most important ones, and there are others also like carbon, boron, lanthanum, etc. What do the alpha stabilizer do? As you can see here, it increases the beta transverse temperature and it stabilizes the alpha phase region. So alpha phase becomes more stabilized. Now, if we come to beta stabilizers, there are basically two types of beta stabilizers, beta isomorphous and beta eutectoid. The first thing that the beta stabilizer does is reduce the beta transverse temperature, both places you can see. And the elements that are in the beta isomorphous category are vanadium, moly, niobium, tantalum, and tungsten. And in the eutectoid category is iron, manganese, chromium, nickel, and also hydrogen, which is one of the gaseous elements which stabilizes the beta phase. Then there are elements which which do not affect, or they are known as neutral elements. These are basically tin and zirconium, and as you can see, it does not affect the beta transverse temperature, so that it remains straight. So these are roughly the categorization of the elements which are added on to titanium for getting different phases and also different alloys. Here, I am showing the pseudo binary phase diagram where you have temperature on the y-axis and beta stabilizer concentration on the x-axis. Now, there are two empirical formulas. The first is for measure of alpha phase stability, and it is known as aluminium equivalent. And you put in the weight percentages of the elements that you have in the alloy plug into this, and you get a number. So that is known as the aluminium equivalent. So you have aluminium, tin, zirconium, and oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. Then, as a measure of beta stabilization, you have what is known as moly equivalent, and you have all the elements with a multiplication factor. And aluminium does decrease the moly equivalent or beta stabilization, so it is negative. And if you look at this formula, the iron is one of the strongest beta stabilizing elements, so it has got a multiplying factor of 2.1, and then there's nickel, cobalt, chromium, etc. are there, and moly is 1. Now coming back to the pseudo binary phase diagram, here you can see two phases, alpha and beta, and in between you have a region of alpha plus beta. You also have this dotted line, which stands for the martensitic start line. In titanium also, yes, Please ask Ajay Kumar. You have a question?
No, sir. Questions we will take in the end only after the
Okay.
presentation. No, we will not take question now.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So coming back to this, this line is known as the beta transist line, and it is very important for titanium alloys. In most of the alloys that you buy, you will see the beta transist temperature of that alloy, and above which the alloy exists in the beta phase, single phase beta region. So for each, because the processing is done either above or below this, so this transist line is very, very important. And this is known as the alpha transist line, and below this the alloy composition will exist in single phase alpha region, and in between you have alpha plus beta. Now this is where the conventional classification of the titanium alloys is shown on this diagram. On the extreme left hand side, where you have almost negligible amount of beta stabilizer concentration, what you have is single phase alloys, which is known as alpha alloys. These are non-heat treatable. We'll look at each category in detail, but here I'm just giving you the classification. And then you come into the region of alpha plus beta alloys, where the beta stabilizer concentration is slightly higher. So you have both alpha and beta phases existing, and then beyond that you have what is the category of beta alloys, and this the first region is where the beta stabilizer concentration is comparatively less. It is known as the metastable beta alloys, and the higher alloy concentrations, it is known as stable beta alloys. And the beta alloys, by their name, you can see it is just beyond the martensitic start line. So that means if you heat treat in this region and quench it fast enough, then you should be able to retain the beta phase at room temperature. So that is why these alloys are known as beta alloys. And then you can age them and to very high strength levels, and that is how beta alloys are designed to be used. So this is the classification in brief of the conventional titanium alloys. We'll look into another category, which is the aluminides later on, which is not here. Here again, the examples of certain alloys are given. From here in the alpha alloy category, you can see Ti 5L 2.5 pin. You only have alpha stabilizers, and then commercial purity titanium also comes into this. As you all know, commercial pure titanium has got quite a good strength level, and it can compete with many of the aluminum alloys. That is why it's also an important category. And then you come into the alpha plus beta alloys, where one of the important alloys is Ti6Al4 vanadium, and 50% of the world titanium production is of this alloy. And then there are other alloys which are for high temperature application, which also belong to this, which is into the category of near alpha titanium alloys. And then when you cross the martensitic start line, you, as I said, go into the beta alloys. The first one of the alloys which is very widely used is titanium 10 vanadium 2 iron 3Al. It is one of the metastable alloys that Boeing uses for landing gears and other applications, very widely used. And then there are other beta alloys which are there. We'll talk about one or two later on also. This is again just to give you an overview of classification so that you get into it. And here again, I am showing the titanium alloy classification now in terms of moly equivalent and the aluminum equivalent. Moly equivalent is the bar is red in color, and the moly equivalent is blue, light blue in color, and the aluminum equivalent is red in color. And here you have near alpha alloys, alpha plus beta alloys, then beta alloys. And you can see as we are going down, these are the various commercial titanium alloys in various categories. We start off with a very high amount of aluminum equivalent, and then as we go down this, the moly equivalent increases and the aluminum equivalent reduces. And if you look at the temperature or the beta transist temperatures here, the beta transist temperatures of these alloys, that is near alpha alloys, are higher, and if you look at beta transist temperature of the beta alloys, they are much lower, because you have higher amount of beta stabilizer in there. Then now coming back to a bit of basics before I go on to the properties, etc. Mainly two crystal structures we see in most of the beta alloys, either the BCC beta phase, which has got a body centered cubic structure, and this is the closeness packed plane, and these two are the close packed direction. So 110 is the close packed plane, and 111 is the close packed direction. And then we have the hexagonal close packed structure, which has got 6 atoms on top and 1 at the center, and then 3 in the middle layer, and again same repeats. And if you look at the slip planes, this is the basal plane, and you have these 3 directions which are close packed. So the basal plane is called either 002 or 0001. So normally it is called 0002. And then you have this is called a prismatic plane. This also has got a close packed direction in this. And then you have these 2 planes which are known as pyramidal planes, and you have the C plus A kind of slip there, although I'm not going into detail, just to because I'll be referring to all this when I talk of certain properties. That is why I thought I should. So you have A slip on these basal and the prismatic plane, and C plus A type of slip for deformation in these pyramidal planes. Now, I will just try and explain you the Burgers orientation relationship. If you have looked at the microstructure of titanium alloys, mostly you must have seen Ti6Al4b beta to structure. You see very geometric pattern, and that is because of this Burgers orientation relationship. Most of the transformations in conventional titanium alloys is beta to alpha or alpha to beta. Now, the close packed plane of this, which is this plane, maps onto this plane, and that is what is done here. And one of the close packed directions matches perfectly with this, and the others are slightly off. So now, when you heat, let's say Ti6Al4b to the beta region, it goes into this, and then when it transforms to alpha, what happens is each of these planes has got 2 close packed directions, and you have 6 such planes. So you get 12 variants of alpha phase, and that is why you see a very geometric pattern in the microstructure also, and that is the resultant of this Burgers orientation relationship that we have. The close packed direction of the HCP matches with the close packed direction of the BCC, which is this. But in only one direction, it is a perfect match. In rest of the directions, it is slightly off, and so that is how it is in titanium alloys. Now, I will just briefly talk about some of the heat treatments that you hear about, so that you are aware and are not perplexed when I talk about them. First is homogenization. After melting, the first thing that is done, that is ingot is taken heated to high up in the beta regime, and that is done because there are a lot of segregations and things like that. And if you anneal it or homogenize it at high enough temperature, chances are that you will reduce the segregation. So homogenization is normally done high up here into the beta region, roughly around 1100 to 1200 degrees centigrade for all the ingots. Okay, then we come to solution treatments. Then solution treatment, there are several of them. The 2 of them that are very commonly used is, one is beta solution treatment. In beta solution treatment, what you do is you take the alloy to this beta regime just slightly above. You do not want to take it too much high, because you see the BCC structure is a very open structure and diffusivities are very high. So there can be very large grain growths if you take it too high a temperature or keep it for a longer time. So you have to be careful. You have to do a shorter time. But the beta solution treatment is just done above beta transfers, maybe maximum 50 degrees centigrade to 100 degrees centigrade above the beta transfers of the alloy. Then you have what is known as alpha plus beta solution treatment, that is done higher in the alpha plus beta region, somewhere in this region, okay, in this pseudo binary phase diagram, somewhere here, depending on the alloy, it is done slightly higher up in the alpha plus beta region. Then when you want to age alloy, normally it is done lower in the alpha plus beta region. That is again varies from alloy to alloy. It can be anywhere from 450 to 700 degrees centigrade. Then you have in alpha alloys what is known as alpha solution treatment, which is in this region. For these kinds of alloys, you basically solution treat here. So it can both relieve the stresses as well as you can solution treat. And there is also stress relieving that we normally do, especially in welding and all. And mostly the temperature regime is in the 400 to 700 degrees centigrade, and it is mostly in the alpha plus beta regime. It is never normally not done above the beta unless there is some requirement. And then you, in case of titanium alloys, you also hear about a term called as min annealing. Now, what is min annealing is when you are processing the wrought material, that is either a rod or a bar, what you do is just annihilate in that furnace for not very long, but maybe roughly 1 hour or so that some annealing is done, but it is not a full annealing, mind you, and some amount of deformation still remains, and this is known as a mill anneal structure. Normal supply conditions for most of the titanium alloy are mill annealed unless you tell the supplier to provide you in certain heat treatment conditions. Here I'm showing, just trying to correlate some of the microstructures so that you appreciate what are the changes that you get, because these have direct impact on the mechanical property. Here again on the left hand side, I'm showing a pseudo binary phase diagram, and this is an alloy like 6L4V. Now suppose you have heat treated in the beta phase, then you will get very big grains of prior beta grains of beta, and if you air cool it, then you will get alpha, which is slightly coarser, and if you have quench it faster, then you might be able to get martensite. Depends again on the heat treatment. Then that is a cooling rate and the alloy. And then if you have deformed it in this regime and then you are heat treating here, you get certain amount of primary alpha and rest transform beta. I will show you the exact SEM microstructures, but you get much finer grain sizes if you have deformed in alpha beta and are heat treating in this regime. I will again just introduce you to some of the microstructure. This is a alpha alloy. It's a Russian alloy. It is similar to commercial purity titanium. That is, so it's a single phase. So it has to be etched to see. So you can see the different grains. So this is a single phase. No second phase is there in this. And this is many times used for formability applications. Then what you have is, this is the microstructure of half alloy. It is half the composition of Ti6L4V. Here it's also alpha alloy, but slight amount of beta is there. So you can see these alpha grains with discontinuous beta phase at the boundaries. This usage of this alloy is very wide, and I'll show you again the usage of these alloys. Then as far as alpha plus beta alloys are concerned, if you heat treat alpha plus beta alloy like TS6L4V into a beta phase, and then you have cooled, either air cooled or water quench. If you water quench, you will get martensite. I will show you the martensite, but here it has been air cooled, and you can see different colonies of alpha. This is called alpha colony. That is where the titanium alloy starts becoming complex. You see, you have one grain which is a prior beta grain, but you have in them several colonies, and you can see the geometric pattern that I was talking about when I was talking about Burgess orientation relationship. So these itself can have different orientations, so it can work as subgrains. Okay, so that is where the properties etc. start getting affected. And when you beta treat and then cool slowly, you also, most of the titanium alloys, that is richer titanium alloys, you get what is known as grain boundary alpha. That is, alpha precipitates along the grain boundaries, and there is a region which is denuded of alloying elements, and that is a path where the deformation can have can proceed easily, and is many a times cause of many of the failures. So you have to be careful when you are talking about richer alloys, and then when you are heat treating, you should try and get not get alpha plus alpha along the boundaries. Then same alloy, if you deform in the alpha plus beta region and then cool it very slowly, then you get what is known as equiaxed microstructure. You have alpha here, which is the dark one. All these dark gray ones are alpha grains, and you can see beta. This is a backscatter electron image on the boundaries. Now, this kind of structure has got very high ductility microstructure and mostly used for superplastic application. Whenever you have a superplastic application, you can see you have got very fine grain sizes as compared to this, where grain sizes are pretty large. Here you get much finer grain sizes, and the two phases are distributed almost 50-50, and so that is where the superplasticity kicks in. Then the next two structures are of near alpha titanium alloys, and this is what is known as bimodal structure. This is very important. I mean, for applications in aero engines, what you have is these bright regions are primary alpha. This happens when you deform the. I will talk about it slightly more in detail, but this structure as such is called bimodal structure. Why is it called a bimodal structure? Because there are two types of grain. One is primary alpha, which you can see, and another is transformed beta. Okay, this is a transformed beta. It has got alternate layers of alpha and beta, as in this structure, which is called a transformed beta microstructure. So here it is a combination of this alpha phase, which is shown here, and the transformed beta. But the grain sizes are much finer. Similarly, when you cool differently, you get a much finer structure. So these are used for applications which see both creep as well as fatigue. Then coming to beta alloys, as I told you, can retain the beta phase, but the alloys which are metastable beta alloys are normally used in alpha plus beta deformed, solution heat treated, and aged condition. So here I am showing you a microstructure which is of alloy Ti10 vanadium 2 iron 3 aluminium, which is used for landing gears of the aircrafts. And here again, what you see is, you can see dark colored primary alpha, which is limiting the beta grain sizes, and inside you have very fine alpha. Now this fine alpha is precipitated for a different region. For once you have aged this alloy, then only this fine alpha precipitates and gives it high strength. So all these beta alloys have got much higher strength as compared to Ti6Al 4V vanadium and all. And but for in these alloys, after you have alpha plus beta deformed, you solution treat in alpha plus beta regime, and then you have to age it to get this Ti6. If you deform, solution treat, and cool it, you will get this precipitation of the alpha. But in this, not. So that is the difference between beta alloys and the alpha plus beta alloy. Then, if we come to much richer beta alloys, some of them can be used in beta treated condition also. And one of the examples is the beta 21S, which is used for sheet kind of applications. Now that is used for forming operations. So it is used in beta solution treated condition. This is the structure which is single phase beta. It is looking dark because it has been etched. Otherwise you'll not be able to see. This is an optical microstructure, but it is a single phase beta. So in beta condition, it deforms very well. So you deform it to the shape that you want, and then you age it. Then you get this kind of very fine precipitation alpha and the strength. Okay. So you form the component and then age it to give it strength. So this is again one of the examples of beta alloys. Now I will just introduce you to titanium martensite, because everybody knows steel martensite. Now this is first is what is known as lath or packet martensite, and this happens in leaner alloys that has got lower amount of alloying elements. Like this is an example of one titanium 1.78 weight%, copper, and when you quench it after beta treatment, you get this kind of microstructure. This is known as lath martensite and occurs in leaner alloys. Again, TM picture, and this has got very less twinning in it, and lot of dislocation structure which you can see inside. Then in the alloys which are much richer, again here same alloy, you see similar alloy, not the same alloy, where you have now increased the copper percentage to 12.8%. Here you see this, the structure of the martensite is slightly different. It is again very fine lath, but now you can see a lot of twins and all inside the, if you do TM. So this is called acicular martensite, and this occurs in much richer alloys where the MS temperature is comparatively lower as compared to the other example that I showed you. But remember, in titanium, martensite does not strengthen as much in steel because it does not cross the interstitial elements, don't cause that much of distortion. But it certainly refines the microstructure and causes slight increase in strength, but not as much as in steels. Now again, another example of 10-3, which is a beta alloy. If you beta solution treat and then start deforming it, that is, even if you do a tensile stress testing, what you, if you remember, the 10-3, I had shown it on the verge of stability and metastability, and so it is on the boundary line of crossing over from martensitic to non-martensitic. So it is on the borderline, and so it retains the beta phase when you quench from beta above the beta transverse temperature. But when you start deforming it, that is, you push the material or give it slight amount of energy, it starts transforming to martensite, and you can see this in a elastic regime of the stress strain curve, and it is known as stress induced martensite. It is called stress induced martensite because the stress has started the transformation. So, and it is also grain size dependent. So you can get all sorts of tensile curve depending on the grain size that you have. Same material, different grain sizes, you will get different kinds of tensile curve. Or although all are beta treated, you have treated at different temperatures. The top bottom corner one is treated at 1200 degrees centigrade. Thereby the grains have grown very large, and there is very less amount of transformation which will happen in this, and you will almost get a smooth kind of curve. Okay. Then the other thing that happens in mostly beta titanium alloys is when you quench them or age at very low temperatures, you get what is known as omega phase, and these are very fine. Normal microstructure, unless you do 2EM, you will not be able to see them. But you get very, very fine precipitation of what is known as omega phase. This is a hexagonal phase. That is, it's a hexagonal microstructure, and it causes embrittlement. So beta alloys, you should never age to lower temperatures. That is roughly below 450 to 400 degrees centigrade. Again, varies from alloy to alloy. It will result in embrittling an alloy, and that is the reason again why beta alloys are slightly difficult to weld also, because of this embrittlement effect which is there. So you have to take care somehow. Similarly, different other morphologies of omega phase, it can occur in cuboidal shape or ellipsoidal shape. Again, depends on the misfit which is there due to the alloying element. So but these phases you will not be able to see even under SEM. So you will not be see, although it will affect your mechanical properties. So in case of beta alloys, you need to be careful. Now, other thing that happens, as I've told you already, in case of Ti6L4V, this is a beta alloy. Again, you can see when you age after beta treatment, it causes precipitation of alpha around the grain boundaries, and a grain boundary denuded zone, and that is harmful for mechanical properties. So that is why while processing beta alloys, you have to be careful, and there are strategies which are there for processing all the titanium alloys as well as beta alloys, so that you don't get much precipitation of alpha around uh, uh, the grain boundaries. But that is a common thing in beta alloys, and you need to be careful. That is what. The other very important aspect where titanium alloy differs from steel is uh, if you want to globularize, most of the time you will see that alpha precipitates, alpha and beta precipitate and lamellar things. Now, if you want to uh, make it globular, it is not possible just by heat treatment as in steel. What you have to do, you have to deform. Once you deform, this is the alpha layer, this is the beta layer. Dislocations are introduced and subgrains form, and when you annihilate these subgrains recrystallize, and you get what is known as globular alpha. This is many a times required for property requirements. I will talk about it again later, but this is a very important. That is why many of the titanium alloys are given a lot of deformation in the alpha plus beta regime. Otherwise, you will not be able to refine the grain sizes and globalize the grain sizes. Okay, and once you take it to beta, again all this effect is lost. So again, in titanium alloys, you have to be very careful and monitor your temperature very well. So now I talk about melting, although I'll not talk about it in detail. Now, this is one of these titanium sponge, which was first sponge take that was made in DMRL. As you know, it is produced by Kroll's process, and where you reduce the TiCl4, titanium oxide is converted to TiCl4, and that is reduced by magnesium, which is driven out, and then you get a cake like this, which is known as a titanium sponge, and then this is crushed to get titanium sponge. That is the starting raw material. Now, as far as melting goes, one of the most industrial processes of melting is vacuum arc remelting. Although there are other methods like electron beam and plasma melting, but most prevalent one, and that is also followed in India, is VAR, vacuum arc remelting. Now, you can melt in non-consumable mode or consumable mode. By non-consumable mode, I mean the electrode does not melt, but there is a tungsten electrode which is attached, and the material is kept in a crucible, and arcing is done after applying vacuum, and it melts and solidifies in the water-cooled copper crucible. And so this type of melting is called a non-consumable, and that is only for lab purposes. Mostly in industry, you have what is known as consumable electrode melting, where you make a electrode. Here I'm giving an example of a 5 kg electrode, but the electrodes that are made industrially are much larger in tonnage, in several tons. I will show you the picture. So you make an electrode, attach it to the stub, and that acts as an electrode. The arcing is between the electrode and the bottom of the crucible, and it starts melting part by part and solidifies into the crucible, and that is called a consumable melting. And here I'm giving you an example of an alloy Ti5Al, 5 vanadium, 5 moly, 3 chromium. Other thing that you do in titanium alloys is if you look at most of the beta stabilizers, they are either moly, vanadium, iron, or niobium. And all of them have got higher melting points as compared to titanium, and they are also denser. So if you add these elements as pure elements, there are chances of segregation, because we are melting by the process itself is part by part. So what you do is you add them as master alloys. Like here we have used moly aluminum master alloy, and we have also used vanadium aluminum master alloy. Then you can add extra aluminum which is there, or any other element that is there into this, mix it thoroughly physically, and then press it into an electrode to make an electrode. This is just a schematic of a VAR melting process. Here I'm showing a consumable melting. This is called a stringer rod, and this is whole thing is enclosed in vacuum. Here you have the vacuum pump. Here you have the electrode. Same thing is shown here also, and this is a copper crucible which is water cooled from outside. Here the water comes in and goes out, and you, by arcing, you are melting, and then it is depositing in the crucible, and then slowly this is lowered, and the electrode gets consumed and gets solidified in copper crucible. Here I am just showing one industrial furnace which is underground, so you can see the top part of it. It can be above ground also. So the both are possible. So industry furnaces capacities are roughly from, let's say, 250 kg to 10 tons. So they are huge furnaces which are there. Now here I'm just showing you how big an industrial electrode is. This is around 172 kgs. Several compacts were welded together by plasma welding and made into an electrode. And after, let's say, melting several times, this is the kind of ingot that you get, which is around 650 dia. This is a triple melted 2.8 ton ingot, which is getting machined. And in the lab conditions, you can also melt lower amounts of material by non-consumable melting. And here I'm showing a button which is around 50 grams, and this is a 500 gram pancake, which, and the dia is around 100 and also thickness around 7 to 10 So these are also possible if you have a non-consumable mode in the melting furnace. But these are all done for laboratory scale studies only. In industrial scale, it is only what you call consumable melting is what you normally see. Now, just talk about slightly about the corrosion resistance of titanium. Titanium, as you know, has got very good corrosion resistance. Here, the galvanic series in flowing seawater is shown, and you can see this titanium is towards the top end, and so it has got very good corrosion resistance against seawater and also many other chemicals and all. So that is seen in this galvanic series in seawater. Now, why the titanium is has got a very good corrosion resistance is because it has got a very thin layer, protective layer of TiO2 on the surface. It forms, but mind you, this is not as impervious as in aluminium. So it does oxidize, but still it serves a lot of purposes and it protects titanium. Now, this oxide layer performs very well in oxidizing atmospheres or solutions like which has got chlorides, sulfates, etc. But it does not perform very well in reducing atmospheres like sulfuric acid and all, and also like HF and all. That is why HF plus HNO3 is what is known as Kroll's reagent. It is used as etchant, a common etchant for titanium alloy. Now, the corrosion resistance of the titanium can also be enhanced by adding certain elements like palladium and all. So, in electrode materials and all, palladium and all are added so that corrosion resistance increases. The other point about titanium alloys are there are no inclusions in titanium alloys because they are melted in vacuum, very pure materials. So it is unlike steel. So absolutely clean. So there is no pitting corrosion taking place. And but titanium alloys does undergo crevice corrosion because of the nature of this oxide. So it does undergo crevice corrosion. And hydrogen also can cause problems because hydrogen is very much soluble in certain in most of the titanium alloys, and it can cause embrittlement problems. So you have to be careful. It takes in a lot of hydrogen, and this is where I'm showing this crevice corrosion. Crevice corrosion is important. If there is an application that you are designing your you are using titanium alloys, and it is in certain amount of fluid, and there is a close contact with, let's say, riveting or bolting, and is closed processes where you have chloride environments. This is autocatalytic, and it basically takes off disturbs this oxide layer in the closed spaces where this gap is less, and outside is protected, but in this closed crevices it starts eating away the oxide, and you can have problems of crevice corrosion because of the breakup of the oxide layers. So I will now talk about different alloy systems and all, and then finish off. So I will go on to first alpha alloys. Now here are the commercial alpha alloys which are there. Several alpha alloys are shown here, starting with several grades of commercial purity. CP stands for commercial purity titanium, and you can see the only alloying element that you have is oxygen, and some amount of iron is put in because you want to control the grain size. Otherwise, these are single phase materials, difficult to control the grain size. Here I am showing you the yield strength. The oxygen is a very dissolves very well in titanium. A large amount of it does dissolve, and it is one of the main strengtheners. So although it also embrittles, but it is used as a strengthening agent, and you can see it here. As you are increasing the oxygen, these yield strength levels are going up. Okay, so there are several grades of CP titanium depending on what oxygen levels you want. And then, as I told you, palladium addition also improves corrosion. These are used as electrode material, pure titanium with palladium, and these are the basically step. And also, ruthenium is also used as an alloying element for increasing corrosion resistance. And mind you, all these alloys, as I told you, are all alpha alloys, single phase. They cannot be, they are non-heat treatable in the sense that you cannot gain much by heat treating them. So these are known as non-heat treatable alloys. Another alloy which is classified in alpha as well as alpha plus beta is what is known as half alloy. I did talk about half alloy earlier. So this is the alloy. It has got a composition which is half that of Ti6-4, and it is used for making aircraft tubes and all. I will show you that. And the strength level is in this regime. Now, how are these alpha alloys processed? First, it is homogenized in alpha regime itself, that is heated, and then deformation, that is forging, rolling, everything is done in alpha phase field only, and then recrystallization, heat treatment also in the alpha phase field. Temperature you can choose depending on the grain size that you want, and so recrystallization temperature also is in the alpha phase field, and this is how commercial purity titanium and alpha alloys are processed. Very simple processing, not much. Here I am showing a microstructure of Ti5L 2.5. You can see the single phase grain with slight bit of precipitation on the boundaries, which is iron, which you can see here. This is slight amount of iron, as I told you, you add it because you want to control the grain size. Otherwise, the only control you have on the grain size is deformation and the recrystallization temperature, which you can do control. Okay, so this is one of the single phase microstructure of alpha alloy. This is one of the largest uses is in the hydraulic tube of the aircraft, or LC also uses it. There are kilometers of these half alloy tubes which are there in most of the aircrafts, mainly for hydraulic application. It carries hydraulic fluids for the control purposes because you want to operate different things. And this is how it is processed. These half alloy tubes, they are mainly hot extruded, pilgered, and then annealed and all. So this India also produces it, and it is also used in LC. I'm not going into too much of detail about this. Then another applications is heat exchanger. All these tubes are of commercial purity titanium, or you can use other alloys depending on the strength, etc. that you want. But titanium alloy is certainly one of the major application, is also the heat exchanger applications. Then I will go to alpha plus beta alloys. Here I am showing several alpha plus beta alloys. Here I just want to make a point is that Ti6L4B, as you all know, is the workhorse of titanium industry, and also it is panacea of all titanium alloy usage. You go to anybody, he will just say, if you use Ti6-4, it is easily available everywhere, and so it's a temperature wise, strength wise, it is in the middle category, and there are two types of Ti6-4. One is Normal Ti6Al4b, which has got higher amount of oxygen, strengths are higher, and another which is used for formability applications is known as ELI grade, which is stands for extra low interstitials, where the oxygen other interstitials are limited to 30.13 or 1300 ppm. And then we also have a near alpha alloys which are used for high temperature applications. Here is 6242 is the high temperature titanium alloy which the Americans use for their aero engine application. IMI34 is one of the conventional titanium alloy with the highest temperature capability. But mind you, the maximum temperature that you use conventional titanium alloys is only till 600 degrees centigrade. Okay, not higher than that. And most of the high temperature titanium alloys, as you can see, will have silicon. I will show you what silicon does. It improves basically the creep properties. So here are some of the examples of commercial alpha plus beta alloys and also near alpha alloys, which is a subcategory of alpha plus beta alloys, which occurs towards the alpha phase region. Here I am just showing you the cut-up of a gas turbine aero engine and showing the titanium alloy usages. The front fan discs can be Ti64 or can be a composite, depends on the aircraft. These are huge blades which sucks in air. And then the front stages of the compressor section, again, titanium alloys. And as the temperature increase, you can use 6242, 834, and also the front stages of the compressor, then vanes, and then tail plug is also one of the beta alloys are also used, which has got higher temperature capability. And nowadays, it is not shown here, but gamma aluminides are being used in these last two sections of the last two turbine sections as blades. Gamma aluminides I will talk about briefly towards the end. These are intermetallics, very brittle. They are as like ceramics, difficult to handle, but still GE is using it as in GenX engine. Now coming to Ti6 alpha plus beta alloys and beta alloys, they also have a time temperature transformation curves, and it looks like this. The first curve is for formation of grain boundary alpha. As I was telling you, grain boundary alpha forms first because that's a high energy area grain boundary, and alpha likes to precipitate there. The first thing when you cool alloy, richer alloys, either alpha plus beta or beta alloys, from above the beta transistors, it hits this line. That is, you form the grain boundary alpha, and then if you cool it fast enough, you can form martensite in alpha plus beta alloys, but not in beta alloys. I will show what forms in beta. And then you have the precipitation of intergranular alpha, that is the other alpha that precipitates. It can strengthen, it can do other things. Now this is again a typical microstructure of Ti64 when it is cooled from beta. I have shown this, I will not, but again point you out that the bright regions are beta, very fine, and then the dark ones are the alpha layers, and you can see the colonies separately and a very geometric pattern, which I told you is because of the Burgess orientation relationship. Here I am trying to show you the general property trends of different microstructures. Here on the y-axis, you have tensile ductility, and the x-axis, the yield strength. And a equiax structure always have higher yield strength on similar amounts of, if you consider similar ductility levels. So a lamellar structure has got comparatively lower tensile ductility as compared to equiax structure. So if you are looking for formability applications, you should use this kind of structure, not a lamellar beta treated structure. You will not be able to form it very well. Then here I am showing you the fracture toughness versus yield strength. Then a lamellar structure, that is a beta treated structure, has got a higher fracture toughness on strength, similar strength level. A equiax microstructure or a bimodal microstructure has much lower fracture toughness as compared to lamellar structure, which has got a higher fracture toughness always. So if you want good fracture toughness, you should go for a beta treatment or should get a lamellar structure. Now this is how all the processing is done. First, I will talk about beta processing. So again, homogenization high up in the beta, then you can cool at different rates. Again, they give you different aspects in the microstructure. Deform in the beta region, anneal in the beta region, and then recrystallize in the beta region, and then you can do annealing or aging, which both are together in alpha beta alloys at a lower temperature of around, let's say, 700, 750 degrees centigrade. And that is how it is beta process, alpha. Now, if you want to do a fully equiaxed or a bimodal processing of alpha plus beta alloys, what you have to do after homogenization, you have to deform, give a lot of deformation in the alpha plus beta regime. You remember to break up the alpha lattice so that you can globularize it, and then recrystallization slightly higher to the deformation region, and then again finally aging, similar aging. So you can get a, depending on the cooling rate during after recrystallization heat treatment, you can get either a equiax microstructure or a bimodal microstructure. If you cool fast enough, you will get a bimodal structure. If you cool very slowly in the furnace, you will get a equiax kind of microstructure, which is good for formability application. This again, I'm showing the same microstructure. I did not explain. This is a beta process structure, beta treated structure. Big beta grains, ductilities are lower, but fracture toughness is better, creep is better. This, you can see a equiax microstructure, higher ductility, lower fracture toughness, lower creep, good fatigue and all. Now, if you, many of the times you would like to have both a combination of good fatigue and good creep. So that is where this thing comes in. This gives a good combination of fatigue and creep properties. Fatigue because it restricts the grain size, the finer grain size, and the lamellar structure gives you good creep. So these kinds of processing is done for compressor blades, turbines, and all these kinds of things. Now I will go on to near alpha titanium alloys, which are subcategory of alpha plus beta alloys. Now, what is the, as I told, the near alpha alloys occur towards the left-hand side of the pseudo-binary phase diagram towards the alpha phase. And what you try to do is try and reduce the beta phase, because as I told you, beta phase has got higher diffusivity, so it is not good for creep kind of application. So you decrease the amount of beta stabilizers, add neutral stabilizers like tin and zirconium. Tin and all also combined with aluminium to precipitate alpha 2, which strengthens, and that is what is used in high temperature titanium alloys. And you replace the higher diffusivity beta stabilizer like vanadium with higher, lesser diffusivity beta stabilizing elements like moly, niobium, etc., so that the diffusivity is lesser and you can get good high temperature properties. And the other problem with near alpha titanium alloys, you have to restrict iron and nickel like anything. You have to be in ppm level. I'll show you the effect, but it really spoils the creep properties, and that is why these sponge, titanium sponge with very low iron and nickel is very rare in the international market. You will not go. These are very low. Let me tell you. I'll show you the how much. Then, as I told you, silicon is used in most of the high temperature titanium alloys because it basically improves the creep properties by blocking the slip transfer or restricting the deformation between the laps. I will show you the microstructure of this. And then there is also an intermediate anneal which can improve the creep, but at this I am not talking about this. When you talk about too much in detail about titanium, we'll talk about that. Now, this is how the near alpha titanium alloys are processed. Again, homogenized, similar. Now, here you can see, other than alpha plus beta regime, there is also two other solvers which have come in. That is Ti silicide solvers, which is higher, and Ti3Al solvers. So you have to be careful while processing these alloys. You carry out deformation and also recrystallization above this Ti3 silicide solvers, because once silicide precipitate, these alloys are going to become brittle. And then after the final recrystallization, heat treatment and all, you finally anneal or age it below the Ti3L solvers. Ti3L is an ordered structure, and when it precipitates, deformation gets restricted. You have lower ductility, so you don't want to do any processing after this, but it strengthens. So that is why this treatment, aging treatment, is given to high temperature titanium alloys for getting in this Ti3L precipitation because it renders strength and also gives good creep properties. Now here I am showing you the comparison of two types of structure and creep. This is a bimodal structure. This is a lamellar structure. As I told you, this is strain and this is time. This is at 600 degrees centigrade and 300 MPa of load. The bimodal structure has got lower creep, higher creep deformation, whereas a lamellar structure, that is a beta treated structure, has always a good creep property. This is a lamellar structure of the IMI 834 high temperature titanium alloy, and this is a bimodal structure, which I've shown you. These are optical microstructures. Now here is the crossroad. So here on the y-axis we have fatigue, and on the x-axis you have creep. So both are at crossroads. So that is why you want, wherever you want both of them, you have to have an optimum structure, and that is where the bimodal structure comes in, which is creep fatigue optimized microstructure. As I told you, used for blades, disc, etc. in the rotating parts of an aero engine. Here I am showing you the what silicon does. This is alpha lathe. You can see this is a beta lathe, supposed to be beta lathe, but it is discontinuous because the amount of beta fraction is less in high temperature near alpha titanium alloys. So what silicon does is it precipitates and blocks the slip transfer, so that deformation cannot pass on from alpha to beta and to another lathe. So the slip is restricted, and thereby it improves the creep resistance of high temperature titanium alloys. Here I am showing you the effect of very, very low amounts of iron and nickel. Why they are very important. Here there are two alloys which were melted with different amounts of iron and nickel. You can see they are in ppm level. This is 65 ppm iron. This is 233 ppm of iron, and also nickel. Both act synergistically to reduce the creep. It basically causes anomalous diffusion, and that is why it basically spoils the creep. Here you can see the two alloys. Timate 834, which has got much lower iron and nickel as compared to DMRL 834, which has got a much higher iron and nickel. Mostly iron and nickel come from the titanium sponge and also the master alloys that you use. So you have to be careful with them. So you can see the jump in creep properties only because of this. Then I come on to other important property, which is known as dwell fatigue. Many aero engines do experience, most of the aero engines in fact experience this. As compared to a sawtooth kind of weight, what we do in dwell fatigue is you hold the load at the highest point for some amount of time, and that causes decrease in fatigue life more than this, and that is why this is known as a cold dwell fatigue, because it happens at lower temperature, and this is very pronounced in near alpha alloys and alpha plus beta alloys. Here again I am showing you the in this table, and the testing is done around 95% of the yield set, so that it fails quite fast and you don't have to carry out fatigue testing. Fatigue testing, as you know, is very time consuming. Here I am just comparing DMRL developed titanium alloys which were forged to 25 mm dia rods and also to 250 mm dia rods. Slight difference in yield strength, and you can see the difference in continuous cycle, number of cycles that was seen. That is this kind of cycle, which is also larger in this because of the finer microstructure, and also the dwell fatigue life is also larger in this as compared to in this because of various. I'm not going into too much of detail, but I'll show you. This is basically because of micro texture. I will show you another example where I'll show micro texture. And when you divide this by this is what is known as dwell fatigue life. You can see this is pretty high in this, but lower in this. This is primarily because of micro texture or texture which comes in, but it does affect the mechanical property. That is why I'm showing you here. And there have been quite a few engine failures. That is why people have started bothering about dwell fatigue also. Here again, I'm showing the processing of 6242, which was processed differently. This is again from Jim Williams' book. You can see that it was processed to have low microstructure. Some material was processed to have high microstructure, and then there are beta forge and retired impeller parts also. And the dwell fatigue dwell time was 2 minutes, and it was tested for 95% of the maximum. Maximum stress was 95% of the yield stress. And you can see in the low microtexture, the dwell fatigue debit is much lower as compared to that in higher microtextured material. And then beta 1, it is lower for various other reasons. I'll just show you the reason. The main reason which is it is there is because if you see the critical resolved shear stress of the this is for plotted for Ti6L single crystal, which is the alpha phase, which is there in most of the high temperature titanium alloys. This is the prismatic slip, CRSS, and then this is for basal slip, and they are almost through the temperature range, they are almost similar, although this is lower as compared to basal slip because of the C/A ratio. And when you have C+A deformation, this is almost twice or thrice of this CRSS requirement. So this deformation to cause C+A slip is very, very difficult. It requires higher stress level. Now, why fatigue crack, dwell fatigue cracking happens is explained by Bashe, although this explanation is by no means complete, but still it is there because of lack of clearer explanations which are there. Now, if you have a textured material, one which is textured where you have easy deformation and easy slip, and you have a orientation which is difficult to deform, that is, if you have to deform in the C+A region, then what happens is it deforms in the soft region, unloads onto the hard region, that is deformation wise hard. It adds on to the applied stress, and it reaches the fracture strength before it reaches the deformation stress, and so it starts cracking. I will not go into too much of these physical details. If somebody wants, I will explain later on, because I want to finish, because within 5 minutes probably I'll finish. So I will not, but this is what is the explanation of why dwell fatigue cracks appear. And mind you, dwell fatigue cracks happen inside. I mean, it is we have been taught that fatigue cracks appear on the surface, but dwell fatigue cracks initiate in the inside. Here there is a flat sample which was part of my postdoc work, and which was dwell fatigue tested. This is Ti6242, and you can see the main crack is a flat sample, which the image was taken at two different orientations. This is a flat surface, and this is the edge. And micro radiography was done, and along with this main crack, you can also see a very fine secondary cracks which are embedded. And we wanted to know what is the orientation in them around the cracks. And as I told you, you can see this. These are dwell fatigue initiation regions. Somebody again has raised hand, but I will attend after I finish my lecture. So you can see the faceted region, that is crack initiation region, is inside, not on the surface. And this is how it looked like. Now there are a lot of techniques where you can find out the orientation of this plane with respect to the loading axis. You can also know the orientation and all. There are methods which are there. I'll not go into those details, but certainly if somebody is interested, I can explain. Now, this is the broken sample, flat sample that I had shown the micro radiograph earlier, and this was oriented properly. You note in texture, you have to track the orientation of the sample, and this is the camera, and this is the electron gun, and it was oriented properly. That is, loading axis is in this ND direction, and then the scans was taken after polishing inside where the crack is exposed, and I will show you the microtexture. You don't have to too much, but you can see the microtexture is almost like microstructure. you can understand much more as compared to XRD microtextures, which are very slightly difficult to understand. You can see this crack. These are two different samples tested separately, and you can see the whole crack is kind of embedded. This red region is the hard region. Hard region means this C axis is oriented in the loading axis. As I told you, C plus X A deformation requires higher stress. That is the hard region. Okay. As compared to that, blue and green are the rest of the region. What you can see is as soon as it goes, the crack goes into a soft region, it either meanders or it blunts. You can see this. So what Bashe has told is correct, that the deformation happens in this soft region and it unloads onto the hard region, and the cracking initiates in the hard to deform region. And microtexture plays a huge role in this dwell fatigue failure. So this is again the same microstructure of which I had shown you the microtexture earlier. You can see you cannot make too much of difference in microstructure, but I will now show you again a microtexture. You can see the hugely different microtextures. This the colored regions is the microtexture region. Some have very fine microstructure. This is called a random microstructure, that is in specimen C. These are stringers which are there. Again, you can see stringer like oriented region, and these are larger microstructures, microtextures region, and this causes lower fatigue life, lower dwell fatigue life, and all that. Okay, so that is where I will end. Near alpha titanium alloys, go on to beta alloys. Now beta alloys, as I told you, have got much higher amount of beta stabilizers, and you can retain the single phase beta by quenching or faster cooling, and you also get very fine precipitation of omega phases. Most of the beta alloys, that is what you have to be careful with. Again, these are the weight percentages of elements which can single-handedly retain the beta phases. You can see iron is a very strong beta stabilizer. The amount required to stabilize the beta phase at room temperature is much low as compared to other elements. So beta alloys are this side of this phase diagram. So first you have the metastable beta alloys and then the beta alloys. Again, you have a TTD diagram. In this case also, you have firstly grain boundary alpha forming, and instead of martensite formation, what you have in beta alloys is the omega solvus. So whether you are quenching it or isothermally aging at low temperatures, that is lower than let's say 450, 400 degrees centigrade, you are bound to get omega phase, which is embrittling. So you have to be careful in beta alloys, and that is where the problem lies in beta alloys in case of welding and all. So then you have, as you cool more or longer time, you get alpha precipitation, which is uniformly inside the grain. So I will talk about just two alloys, 1023 and 21s. One is at the verge of stability and metastability, and the other is much more stabilized beta alloys. And you can see this is the omega plus beta region. So you get in beta alloys, you start getting another phase, which is omega phase. So these are the commercial beta alloys which are there. SP700 is a superplastic Japanese alloy, and it is superplastic at much lower temperature at compared to Ti64, but it has somehow not caught up people's imagination. But it's still there anyway. It's like 6.4. And these are again 1023, beta 21 as 5553, which is a variation of the Russian alloy VT22. And these are the beta transverse lines. And you can see as you go to richer alloys, beta transverse temperature decreases. What are they used for? They are used for high strength, not dominant, damage tolerant critical fasteners, HCF limited helicopter rotors, aircraft landing gears. They are also used as springs. Most of the titanium springs are beta alloys. And then there are other structures, reasonable damage tolerance structures. It is used in oil field applications. And most of the biomedical applications is beta alloys. They are titanium alloys, you know, have biocompatible, and beta alloys have got lower modulus. That is why many of the newer orthopedic implants are the new beta alloys. Here I'm just showing springs in aircraft, beta C and 1023. springs because elastic modulus of beta is much lower than alpha phase. So it is beta alloys have got lower modulus. Again, a famous use of the alloy 1023, which we have also indigenized for LCA. You can see the main beam of the landing gear of a Boeing aircraft. It can be used for manufacturing this, and also rotor hubs and all. Why 1023 is very attractive is because it has got one of the lowest flow stresses. Here I'm plotting flow stress versus temperature, and it has got one of the lowest flow stresses, and so it can reproduce the die cavity very well, and that is why it is 1023 is very widely used for closed die forging applications, even much better than Ti64 and all, which has got very high flow stresses and other alloys. So as I told you, in case of beta alloys, you have to be more careful about the grain boundary alpha, because there is too much of strength difference. Inside the grain, the strength is high, and around the grain boundary, it is less. So you cannot allow grain boundary alpha precipitation. So, but this is a point of concern, and there are processing routes to minimize grain boundary alpha precipitation. Again, beta alloys are slightly difficult and challenging to process because the processing window is very narrow, because beta transist temperature is lower because of you have added more stabilizers. So the processing window gets narrower, and you have to hit the right window of deformation as well as temperature to get the uniform structure. If you are either lower or higher, you will get a non-uniform kind of microstructure in your material. So that is where you have to be very careful. So again, the beta alloys are also similarly processed. Some are beta processed as 21S. So you have homogenization and then deformation in the beta phase field. You can also do a slight amount of alpha plus beta deformation, recrystallization in beta, and then aging in alpha plus beta to get the 5 secondary alpha precipitation. And this is the microstructure. This is a single phase beta 21S. So that is why you have no contrast. You have to etch it to get contrast. This in SEM. So you'll not get, there is no compositional contrast. So you'll not get any contrast. You etch it, you start getting contrast. This is an optical picture. This again a SEM picture, and you can see the very fine precipitation of alpha, which gives beta alloys the strength. Here are the properties. Just for the sake of it, I have given you, in case somebody is interested, we can go into the details. Both in beta solution treated, it is used in beta solution treated condition 21S, and then when you age it, it gains the it goes to a higher strength level, and so after you form the component, you can age it so that it gains higher strength. This is most of the sheet alloys. You do a bend test to basically check whether you have any alpha on the surface or not. That is a primary concern, because you are heat treating titanium alloys, pick up alpha on the surface when you are heat treating, and so you have to be tested for that. These are some of the applications of 21S in the nozzle behind the engine, and also on the aircraft structure sheet as sheet applications and all. Then you can also do a bimodal processing, as in case of 10 vanadium, 2 iron, 3 aluminium. Wherever you have fatigue kind of application, finer structure is much better, and that is done for metastable beta alloys. And similarly, just like alpha plus beta alloys, they are alpha plus beta deform, and then most of the time these two treatments are combined together, recrystallization or solution treatment, and then finally aging. These are what the effect of each treatment is. I will not go into this much of detail, but if you want to discuss, we can do that later on. And this is how 1023 was processed. It was homogenized in this temperature range, then alpha plus beta deform, and then it was annealed at 780, and then aged around 480 to 520 degrees centigrade. These are some of the properties. You can see very high strength level, very easily achievable, but you can also get lower fracture toughness. unless you do a good microstructure control or heat treatment, you will not get. But you can pump up the fracture toughness also, and then these have very good fatigue life, both LCF and HCF, and also notch fatigue life. I'm not again going into detail, just to give you a flavor. I'm showing you. And again, different microstructures can give you different kinds of fracture toughnesses. Here the solution treatment was done lower, both solution treatment and edging, and the alpha precipitation of very fine, so it resulted in lower fracture toughness. But we changed the heat treatment, and when we get coarser alpha, we get fracture toughness also. So the same material can behave entirely differently. So you need to choose the heat treatment properly and microstructure properly to get a proper. This is the microstructure. So you have a beta grain here, and which is pinned by primary alpha, and then inside these grains you have very fine precipitation of secondary alpha, and that gives stain. And this is the effect of grain size. Beta treated grain size plays a very big role in elongation. So reduction of the grain size does play a major role in increasing the ductility of titanium alloys. And again, a bimodal structure has got a lower fracture toughness as compared to a beta anneal structure, which I have already told. But this is what is being shown here in another alloy, beta CZ alloy. Again, the effect on fatigue properties, you can see a bimodal microstructure gives a much better fatigue as compared to beta anneal structure. That is why you go for a bimodal structure wherever you have fatigue kind of applications. So I will just briefly touch upon biomedical and then gamma amide and end my talk. Now, there is a big titanium alloys, as you know, are very biocompatible. Now, one of the first alloys to be used for biomedical application is Ti6Al4B. Although this is not the very good material, but still, I mean, people use because there was a lot of data available. But there are issues with Ti6Al4B because vanadium is known to promote cancer. So vanadium are getting replaced in the newer generation alloys, and then aluminium also appears to cause neurological problems. So that is why there are newer alloys which higher amount of beta but lower aluminium or no aluminium almost. Now the other thing about beta alloys is that it has got a much lower elastic modulus and much lower than alpha phase also. And it is also much lower than stainless steel and cobalt alloys, which are also used as biomedical implants. Now, the modulus of bone is around 30 GPa. So the beta alloys have generally got modulus is around 50 to 70 GPa, but more often 60 to 70 GPa. And it is better to have a modulus which is nearer to bone, then you don't have some problem like load shedding and all. So there are new alloys, bioalloys, titanium biomedical alloys that are being discussed. Here I have shown the modulus of cobalt chromium alloy, which is a biomedical alloy, stainless steel, which is also used, Ti6-4, which is still used as one of the implants, and then another new alloy, which is beta alloy 35NB7, zirconium 5 tantalum. As you can see, it has got much lower modulus and approaching the modulus of bone. And these alloys, that is why, are becoming famous. And so the designing depends on if you can have your composition so that you can have twinning and martensite formation, then you can have this lower modulus. That is what people have realized. So there are a host of compositions which people have come up with for biomedical applications, but it is still I mean, it is seeing use, but not exactly used till now. Here again, I'm showing the properties of different alloys used for biomedical applications and their modulus, strength levels, elongation, etc. And you can see these newer beta alloys have got much more lower modulus as compared to alpha plus beta or alpha alloys. And the strength is actually not a criteria, but you have to have sufficient strength, that is all. But strength has never been a criteria for biomedical application. So the people are designing new alloys for biomedical applications. This is an example of a hip replacement. So this is made of Ti6-4, which is anodized, and this part is made of steel, copper chromium alloy, because it has to be very resistant. And this top cap is high density polyethylene, which is comes down to this, and so this is a hip joint which is there and made of titanium. Then in DMRL there was also earlier work on Kalam Raju stent which was used, but that was made of steel. But now you can use shape memory alloys. Dr. Bhaumik in NAL is doing some work with Sri Chitra Tirunal Trust, and they have made a stent which is made of TiNi nickel-based TiNi shape memory alloys for making stents, because the shape memory alloys can change, can take different shapes just by phase transformation, which can be done by just heating with infrared bulb, or that is the usage, and that is the use of a stent. As you all know, stent is used for clearing out blockages and all. So there is again a huge amount of biomedical field which is there. Now I'll end with titanium aluminides. Now titanium aluminides are basically intermetallics, and when you if you increase the aluminium content, content in titanium alloys, and you go up to around 40 to 45 or 58%, then you start getting a phase known as gamma, which is an ordered structure. The advantages of this is, firstly, it has got a very good oxidation resistance. Here I am comparing the near alpha titanium alloy like IMI 834, along with that the second generation gamma aluminides and the third generation gamma aluminide. You can see the oxidation resistance is much better for these alloys. That is the first advantage. Other advantage is obviously the density is much lower, so it is very lightweight. Elastic modulus is much higher, 170 GPa, thereby distortions or flapping, etc. of the blades are less, and it retains its strength till around 800 up to 800 degrees centigrade. So this is beyond the conventional titanium alloys, and it can directly replace the nickel-based sulfur alloys. Now there are different generation of gamma aluminides. There are first generation which has got niobium percentage is much lower than in the order of 1 or 2%, and then you have second generation alloy which has got niobium in the range of less than 5 atom percent, and third generation alloy which have got slightly higher niobium percentages, and then there are complex other alloying elements which are there. This is the relevant part of the phase diagram. Here is where you get gamma aluminide. So you can see beyond 40 atom percent. Mind you, the composition is in atom percent. From 40 to 50 atom percent is when you start getting this gamma aluminides. And there are different alloys which are being designed. Presently, we have also started some work. I can show you some of the compositions that we have studied. And again, it's a very complex phase structure. You have 3 phases at least: bright, beta phase, and then you have the gamma phase, which is gray and slightly less dark alpha phase. So there are at least 3 phases which are there, if not more. It's a complex kind of phase diagram, and also the microstructures are slightly complex. And here we had studied certain alloys which are listed here, and these are GE composition which GE has used already in the that is 48Al2Cr2Nb, and we have studied the oxidation resistance and also the creep. So one of our alloys is giving very good creep properties, which is basically GA5, this composition, and this composition does not have, it has got intermediate oxidation resistant, but creep is very, very good. So we have to evaluate other properties like fatigue and all, and then we can go for usage. So I come to end of my talk. I just leave you with this image. This is a GE GenX engine, and as I told you, these last two stages are made of 48 2 GE composition, and it is flying in a commercial aero engine. So their engineering is such that they can handle this kind of brittle material also in the engine. So thank you very much. Now I'm ready to answer questions.